Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, welcome. Do join us. Welcome wherever you are, here at the Gare Maritime or out there online somewhere in the world. Thank you for being here, for joining us for this new European Bauhaus Festival. My name is Annelies. This is Thursday, day one of the new European Bauhaus Festival. 4 days packed with discussions, ideas and discoveries, with opportunities to get to know one another, to exchange ideas, to involve people in your projects or be asked to be involved in other people's projects perhaps. A festival not only taking place here in Brussels, but in true European fashion in many, many places across the European Union, in a polyphonic way, looking at the central questions from different perspectives and realities. Later this morning, we will make a true Europe vision grand tour, so to speak. We will be plugging into activities and discussions in North and South, in East and West. In Rome, Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, will answer questions about the relevance and importance for the EU and for its citizens of this kind of festival at this point in time. Especially at this point in time. Because it may feel strange, I don't know if you share this feeling, or awkward, wrong maybe, to talk about beauty, sustainability, togetherness when a war is being waged on European soil. It can trigger conflicting and complicated feelings, poignantly phrased by the Ukrainian poet Ilya Kaminsky when he writes, "We, forgive us, were happy during the war." Still, maybe coming together and discussing the role of culture and craftsmanship, of innovation and research, of what a just and fair society looks like and how it is to be achieved, is an act of resistance against destruction, against war in its own way. Just as the original Bauhaus came into existence on the ruins of the First World War, exploring new ways to shape society, both in terms of new technologies, humanistic ideals, and practical ways of organizing life, through architecture and design as well. Just like the original Bauhaus, this new European Bauhaus aims to create an agora, a safe zone to lay the groundwork for the best that we humans have to offer. Here, today, at the Gare Maritime, a number of panel discussions will be held about the new European Bauhaus and about cities on the front line of the green transition. From 4 o'clock onwards, however, you are also very welcome to join us at the Mont des Arts, the Kunstberg, to experience all that is basically soul food and joyous, both musically and artistically speaking, as well as in shape of workshops. There will also be specialists present, architects, scientists, you name it, at the cutting edge of their field, sharing their innovative and groundbreaking ideas with you for a future-proof life on Earth. Now, however, our first panel discussion. It will be about boundaries. Boundaries come in many shapes and forms these days. They may be physical, they may be spatial, they may be mental, especially with regard, again, to cities. For the opening move, so to speak, Stefano Boeri has accepted our invitation. He's an architect and professor at the Politecnico di Milano in Italy, and he will set the stage for the discussion in a short speech. And you may know Professor Boeri as the creator of the vertical forest in Milano. It's only one of his innovative calling cards. He's a man thinking about, among many other things, how cities and its citizens can be made to breathe in an ever more crowded world. He should be appearing Professor Boeri,
Hello.
very nice
Hello.
to see you. The stage is all yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So, thanks for inviting me. I think it's such an important event, and I'd love to start with some thoughts about the Bauhaus culture, the Bauhaus tradition, the Bauhaus origin. So I think we have to really work trying to study how Bauhaus was important in the history of European culture. And as a president of the Triennale of Milano, who is an institution who was born in 1923, so we know well how the production of objects, the production of furniture, it's the result of the combination of, let's say, the capacity to take a risk of the entrepreneurs, the ability to innovate and to produce an aesthetic value from a community of creative people, and the demands and the requests that are coming from our societies, from our communities. Triennale, like Bauhaus, is now and was an amazing collection, an amazing atlas of innovation that are, in a way, summed up in this series of objects that have a symbolic value and not only a functional value. This is, for instance, something that we all know. It's a lamp produced by the Castiglione brothers in 1962. And if you observe this lamp, it's a simple combination of three things: lamp, steel pipe, and the marble piece. But we know how much this simple additional three element has in reality multiplied the value and the character and the functionality of a lamp. So that's simply to the idea that sometimes to produce innovation, to produce an acceleration innovation, it's enough to put together things that, when put together, are in condition to create a sudden jump toward the future. Bauhaus was that. Bauhaus was at the same time a school open to a city in the south and then in Berlin. Was a lab, was a laboratory where young people, students, researchers, teachers were coming and work, learning from doing. That was one of the lectures coming from Hans Meyer, for instance, and from Walter Gropius. But Bauhaus was also a school. And I think we should go back and study some of the profile of the main protagonists of the Bauhaus school, like Johannes Eaton. Eaton was an innovator in the methodology of teaching, was an amazing pedagogist, and who was a person who was, let's say, demonstrating that an open school is something which can really revolutionize our way of thinking. Thanks to Bauhaus, thanks to its newness to the dimension of teaching, we had in the last century different experiences. And I think we could and we should start now talking about schools. I believe that open schools, schools that are open 24 hours a day, 360 days a year, to all the generation, to all the culture, could become in Europe, could become in our countries, the epicenters of this new meeting, new encounter between community of practices, communities of creative people, and community of entrepreneurs. I really believe that this is one of the things we have to do. And for instance, I show you what we are doing in Tirana, Albania, where we are now designing, realizing 23 schools that have this character. These are schools open to everybody. So at the ground floor of the schools, you have the bookstore, you have the library, you have leisure for sport, you have all the leisure that are used by the district all around. And this concept of open school is very important. It's something that we experienced in 2008 also in Torino, when Torino was a capital of world design. And we have put together in that case a list of community of practices, a list of community of people that had a request, then a list of community of creatives, of designers that were, let's say, available to produce an idea, a formal idea, a prototype, studying the request of the community of practices, and then a list of companies of, let's say, entrepreneurs that were, let's say, available to realize a prototype, putting together the demand coming from the community of practice and the amazing, let's say, knowledge and technical skills that came from the community of creative people. So if I should describe what is a community of creative, which is in a way the real issue coming from the Bauhaus experience, I would say it's a combination of these three factors: a community of practice, a community of designers, and a community of entrepreneurs. And I think that, and this is in what was this amazing experience in Torino, it was the beginning of the vision of the system of startups that are working now and that are producing with their copyright the result of this thing. But the same kind of attitude we should also use in other field. And you know that I'm, let's say, working long time on urban forestry. I'm working on this kind of, let's say, green obsession. This is one of the character of what we do. And starting from the vertical forest experience in Milano. That's another very important point that is part of the European Bauhaus, let's say, plans and programs. We know well that when we talk about make European cities greener, we are not simply talking about green buildings. It's a larger spectrum of initiatives and projects that we have to develop together. But it's very important to understand that also in this case is not about, let's say, on the skin some targets, some objects, some tools, but it's to combine the practice of people, the idea of creative people, and the capacity of taking risks as entrepreneurs. This is a vertical forest that we have just realized in Eindhoven, in Holland. And this is a social housing vertical forest. And what makes this building so important, in my opinion, is that it's a green building, but it's a building affordable for everybody. And it's a building that is now used by a community of young researchers, a community of students that is, let's say, designing by themselves every part of the apartment of this social housing building, creating itself a larger community. So that's another demonstration of what we could do when we talk about make our cities greener, starting from architecture, but the same kind of attitude we should develop also when we talk about forestation. This is, for instance, the project that we have developed in Milano to plant 3 million of trees in Milano by 2030. I think that also in that case, how we involve local communities in the idea of planting and in the maintenance of plants, it's another very important issue that we should understand how to define also in other part of Europe and sector. A third element that I'd love to bring to your attention, it's about the concept of reconstruction, which is a concept that is so crucial now. And just to start to talk about that, I'd love to go back to something that was happening in Italy in 2016. You know that Central Italy was hit by a very strong and dramatic earthquake. And when we were involved, we have been involved in the reconstruction of Amatrice, for instance, of Norcia, or the other amazing historical center destroyed by the earthquake. We immediately understood the unique way to do that was to put together the local communities, a community of creative people, and a community of entrepreneurs. And exactly was the result of, for instance, was for Amatrice, that we were reconstructing part of the of the restaurant and the community of Tito sounding, standing and creating this kind of new settlements done completely by wooden and timber panels and completely self-sufficient, but always involving the local community people. And just to conclude, I think that what we have to do now is to, let's say, observe what is happening and what could happen in Ukraine. In July 13, and we have decided to, let's say, promote a pavilion, an Ukraine pavilion. We started 3 months ago with a series of meetings in Triennale Milano, and we had the last meeting was in Ukraine last week. But also in this case, I think that the point for Triennale and the point for all of us is to understand how we can involve the local communities in Ukraine to develop this kind of amazing project, how we can, let's say, combine these three components also in this dramatic contest. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Boeri, for your insights and your suggestions, your ideas, your inspiration. Ladies and gentlemen, by now you should have figured out that this is a silent conference, so you all have earplugs that allows you to hear what's going on stage, but also what our remote speakers are saying. Very important. I should have mentioned it before, but you seem like very intelligent people who figured it out by now, so happy to see that. I promised you discussion, panel discussions. That's what we're going to do right now. So up to the next segment.
Hold up. Lickable, I see you. Lickable, I see you.
Welcome, welcome. 3 guests. Let me introduce you very briefly. In the middle, Johannes Hahn. Welcome. You're European Commissioner for Budget and Administration. Yuri Sumi, representative and spokesperson of the World Green Infrastructure Network. Quite a mouthful. And Sorcha Edwards, welcome to you too, Secretary General of Housing Europe. Maybe I should start by asking each one of you to explain a bit more about what you're doing and what the new European Bauhaus means to you. Commissioner Hahn, to begin with you, would you say you're one of the funders of the new European Bauhaus?
Well, it was the initiative of our president. Maybe that's why she referred to the Bauhaus, which was originally created or established once in Berlin. But I'm here because I'm in charge for our real estate policy. We have just adopted a couple of months ago our new strategy, our new policy for the next decade. It's for the first time that we took such a decision, and of course we will follow this Bauhaus philosophy in trying to implement the ideas, the principles. But I have to say we are not starting from the scratch. We have already started in 2005 to introduce elements which we would consider today as elements of the Bauhaus model. It's very much about greening our buildings, creating more energy efficiency, less CO2 emissions, etc. So we were rather successful already, but more has to be done. But it's not only about, from my perspective, the greening of buildings. It's also about participating in the urban planning, being part of it. Brussels is, in particular, often considered a city separated in 2 parts, traditional Brussels and the European quarter. And now, together with the authorities of the region of the city, we try to be much more included, because we understand this is also part of our Bauhaus philosophy, not to be separated from the real life, so to say.
There's a lot to unpack there. We will in the next hour, but I remember from what you're saying that the European Union doesn't want to be a Fremdkörper within the Brussels context. So, Jure Sumi, tell us more about the World Green Infrastructure Network. What are you about?
Well, it's an association, NGO, which combines roughly 30 national associations which are really focusing on green infrastructure. So greening the buildings, greening the cities in the urban, really dense areas. So our purpose, or we are a supporter to the regulators and legislators to teach them why the green infrastructure is
Sorry, use this one?
Yes.
why this infrastructure is important. We see quite a lot that politicians do not have all the knowledge, and we have. So we have the knowledge from the local association and from the people, because we do a lot of small green projects around the world where we involve people. We ask people, what to do, like, students, what they would want to do during the renovation of school. And we are doing a lot of work also with the European Joint Research Center. So we are supporting them on researches which will prove that green infrastructure is not a cost, but it's a benefit. I think this is our key point to do.
We'll go into that more, but I want to bring in Sorcha Edwards. Housing Europe. I think you should be fine with your microphone, but
okay.
if not, then you can use that one.
Yes. Thank you very much. It's really wonderful to be here today. Since the Bauhaus came along as the new kid on the European bloc, we've really welcomed the spirit, beautiful, sustainable together, because it actually goes to the heart of Housing Europe. And in fact, my job is partly done already to introduce the organization, because Professor Bueri, I hope I pronounced it correctly,
Yes.
when he showed this vertical forest in Eindhoven, that's actually managed by one of the organizations that we bring together in our network here in Brussels. So it's a social housing organization, but there are 43,000 of those all over the EU. Perhaps not all of them are pushing the frontiers as quickly as that one in Eindhoven. But indeed, this is what Housing Europe is doing. We're bringing together all of those local, social, public and cooperative housing providers, and bringing their vision to produce and to work with the European legislators for better financing, I mean, good company, better regulation and better information around housing. And
Housing
I think,
specifically for people who don't have big budgets, who are vulnerable in that way, or not necessarily?
So that's a very good question. And I would just like to bring out the term together a little bit more, because actually what we are finding is that the housing situation has become more and more difficult for not just what might be termed low-income groups, but because incomes and rents and price of housing are really diverging across Europe, we really see that housing is a collective issue, and something that can't be left just to each individual to solve their own housing situation. So this is why we really welcome this spirit of togetherness, because I think it's a societal question that we have to look at together and not leave people isolated in their housing problem. So this issue of which groups are dealt with, it really
It pertains to all of us, is what you're saying.
Indeed, actually, yes, we are all vulnerable at the moment because of the rising prices, and now we see. We've mentioned the situation in Ukraine as well. We see that our systems are having great difficulties being able to welcome those vulnerable people in a right way. So you never know who will be vulnerable. So our idea is to have systems that focus on this, finding this solution to the system approach that can cater for all of us.
Can you pass the microphone to
Yes.
Mr.
No problem.
Sumi, please? But because, Mr. Sumi, that is an idea that has a lot of traction, I think, that building green is for the happy few, for the ones who can afford it. Tell us why this is or is not a correct
That's actually
idea.
a super question, because just yesterday I was commenting on one LinkedIn post. They were showing a building, which is just a building, concrete, white and black building. And I comment, you know, it would look much nicer if there would be some green around. And they sent me the link and said, yes, we also do this kind of building. And it was a nice villa condominium. So clearly it was a building for people that cannot afford a lot, and a building who are a building for people who can afford. But you know, the challenge, the question is, you know, is it really so expensive? Not really. If you want to green the building with a bit of, you know, a small forest type of area on the balconies, a rooftop, it represents between 1% to 2% of the cost of the entire building. So, I mean, what are we talking about? Why should we not give this to every single person? You know, and on the end, that's our view. It's always the investor says, yeah, it's additional cost. We will not able to pay for that. But, you know, you give a lot to the community. So we were stuck for 2 years, locked in the apartments. You know, people were not able to go out to the parks, which are far away. So we need to bring these small patches of green to every single house, to every single condominium. And it's super easy.
Yeah.
Maybe as an example, a few years ago, I come from Slovenia. I live in the capital of Ljubljana. There was a building project of a big shopping mall with closed concrete roof. Luckily, in Ljubljana, we have a proper law which says you need to green the building. So they had to redesign the entire structure. So now on the top, you have a huge green roof, a running track, a basketball court. You have a community garden, and it's far away from the parks. So the local people living in this dense area are using now this for their own advantage. They come up with the kids to enjoy the green, which they were not able to do before, and the business is profiting. Mm-hmm. And I mean, there is no brainer. We just need to make sure that people are aware of that. It's super easy.
So, if this is so super easy, Commissioner Hahn, why isn't it happening all over all the time? And to put it back to the Commission, is the Commission already at the crest of what it can do? Is it really walking the talk? You said more can be done, but what is being done?
First, more on a general note, I think one should always see the positive or try to see the positive sides of an event like pandemia. And one of them is certainly that there is also much more awareness now about the way we will work in the future, which has a huge impact on the fact that more people will spend more time at home, because we will have this hybrid working system, which, for instance, is already implemented now in the Commission, and everybody, or almost everybody, I suppose, is happy because there's a lot of flexibility, which has a huge impact on the way how houses should look like, should offer people space, greening, better air, etc. So I think this has provoked a lot of positive understanding amongst authorities to support this development where necessary, also with legal support, not to say constraints. But I think here the situation has really changed over the last 2-3 years, because it's clearly a reaction to a new way of living. So this on a more general note. Concerning the Commission, we will certainly change our real estate structure in the next couple of years. Of course, also as a result of the new way of working, we will reduce office space, and of course we will adapt our buildings to this Bauhaus concept. wherever possible. We have already done a lot.
Can you give an example of what would change in practice for people working there, for example, for yourself?
Well, it's about energy efficiency is an important issue. The greening of buildings is something else. Of course, there we see some limitations. I was in a way jealous to see this vertical forestation because actually I had the same idea concerning our Berlemont building, but I was told there are constructual limitations. But if you have good ideas, let me know. I have not.
That's the whole point of the new European
So
Bauhaus
it's an offer to everybody, providing us with an idea how to overcome this issue, because I think it's an emblematic building, and if we could have really such a forestation, would be great. So please feel free to give us ideas how to overcome these apparently existing constraints. If it's about new buildings or even existing ones, we have already some where we have the rooftop, so to say, greened, where people can spend their free time, lunchtime, whatsoever. So there is a lot, but of course more has to be done. Of course we have now new working arrangements, so it's we have much more open spaces. Open spaces allow much more greening of rooms, etc. So it's also about giving people a feeling when they are in the office that it's a kind of extended living room.
Yeah, an extended living room will, if you say more people will be working from home, we will reduce office space. Does that make office space come available for people who want to meet Europe, so to speak, European institutions? Will it be a sort of possibly a meeting space, or would that go too far?
No, we will very soon reopen our visitor center in the Charlemagne building, which adapts already to this new, not new, but thanks God now implemented principles. But in general, we try to be even more open to visitors, those who want to come to us, but also those who are simply interested in us, in European institutions, because we have people coming to meet us for meetings, but also others which are simply interested in the institutions. And here, I think we have an obligation to lead by example, to give inspiration also for initiatives back home in other parts of Europe.
Ms. Edwards, gentrification, that's what we're also discussing, of course. The ideas are there. It looks like a no-brainer, to use Mr. Sumi's word. But what needs to be done to overcome those hurdles and the hesitations, the limitations, as the Commissioner mentioned?
Yes, I think you've hit on a very important point, and maybe I'll just draw also from the comments around the impact of the pandemic and how it put also divisions in the housing sphere. It brought them really to light, because people who could work at home comfortably did so. Others didn't have enough space. So you had overcrowding issues, and we saw the impact of that, unfortunately, even in the differences in the rates of death when it linked to lack of adequate housing. So it has put a spotlight on housing as such as an area where we really have to focus more. And this issue of gentrification is a crucial one. I think the Commission is doing its best. So during the pandemic, we saw the production of the very fast mobilization of the Commission staff to put together the renovation wave communication. And part of that, they made aware that they are in tune with this risk of gentrification as a result of the greening, because it is indeed what we have seen, unfortunately, in examples where you have greening of the neighborhoods, but unfortunately the people who live there, because of the price increases, are it can no longer stay. So you have an erosion of the community. So I think there's an awareness of this, and the Commission launched as part of the renovation wave something called the Affordable Housing Initiative, which has been turned into a project. You talked about shaping society. It's actually called Reshape, and it's actually looking at ways and examples of where these shared goals of social inclusion and greening and decarbonisation have really been brought together as one in a neighbourhood, because that is really the challenge that we are facing as a society. How can we reconcile all three so that it doesn't lead to gentrification? But I think...
And what is key in that regard?
The key is not to only look at a neighbourhood perspective, but look at the entire system and the regulation that is involved in making sure that profiteering is regulated, so that we have the public sector very engaged. You have limited profit, non-profit sector also engaged in turning neighbourhoods around, and not feeding into what we are seeing very often in the sector, which is an extractive nature of investment, and even in the real estate sector. So even the Commission in the latest macroeconomic stability indicators that they publish, they're actually warning that 14 countries in the EU have passed the 6% warning threshold of rise in house prices. So this was another indirect impact of COVID and this race for space, compounded now by what we are seeing in geopolitical forces. So this, the gentrification is not only happening on a neighborhood level, we are seeing real estate being really targeted for an extractive nature of investment, so really for extracting profit on the short term. And if this is not brought, I think it really goes in the spirit of the Bauhaus, because if we do not bring those type of tendencies, if we do not regulate those and make sure that communities are resilient against the
exploitation in a way.
Exploitation, or let's say against this gentrification force, I think we won't achieve the vision of the EU of having a fair energy transition.
Okay.
It could be sidetracked.
I want to bring in Commissioner Hahn to react to that. More regulation, is that on the radar of the Commission? Do you consider it an important element in achieving the Bauhaus ideals and vision?
Look, but this is, I wouldn't say an ideological issue, but I'm also reluctant, I'm always reluctant if we can only manage things via regulations, because what we have to change is the mindset of people. Of course, sometimes you need regulations in order to, let's say, support this mindset changing. But at the end of the day, it's about ownership. People have to understand it's in their own interest. Of course, maybe, as you mentioned this example, sometimes it's more for the developer to get some regulatory support, let's call it that way, to produce and really an added value. But this is the one side. For instance, in my hometown, Vienna, we introduced a couple of years ago that whenever a social house was built, also an artistic monument had to be included into the construction, giving young artists an opportunity, but also quasi producing a kind of atmosphere which is, I think, helpful. And I think in that respect, personally, I always would like to focus on the so to say, on the power of arguments, of examples, etc., to change or to further develop mindset of people. But indeed, sometimes it's necessary to have this regulatory, let's say, support scheme. But again, here I would be cautious to have something Europe-wide top-down, maybe a kind of framework, but then, of course, in particular when it comes on urban planning, spatial planning, it's very much linked to the situation on the ground. So here I think the principle of subsidiarity is crucial and should apply.
Okay, very clear. We'll go into that in a moment, but I want to stick to the market in a way and also the current political and international situation and ask you, Mr. Sumi, about the impact of all of that on supply and demand of green materials, of building ideas and construction companies. Does that play a role at all?
Yeah, actually, for the greening itself does not play a role. It plays a role because there is lack of material to building the building. So when we talk about the new buildings, the greening itself is straightforward because you need to have a growing media, you need to have a local plants, and need to have local people who are able to install, the green roof or the green patches around. So I don't see that there is a bit of challenge, but I would not say that this is really limiting it on what we are doing. And yes, Vienna is a perfect example what it can be done. And it will be 50% of Europeans living in the cities in very near future. So we need to educate. And if I just go back to what Commissioner Hahn said, we need to give the examples. And one of the example is, biodiversity strategy, which asks the cities to have a biodiversity strategy, the municipal strategy, for all the cities about 20,000 people. And they come to us and say, what does it mean? How do we do it? And this is why now the nature restoration law, which is being prepared, needs to be developed in a way that it will say you do it like this, like this, like this. And then the municipalities will find the material, the people, and the way how to do it. I think this is the point which I agree with Commissioner Hahn, that we need to give them examples, but at the same time also sort of a framework that they start working.
And then mobilize bottom up. Want to come back to that, but still I want to refer to yesterday, vote in the European Parliament on the Fit for 55 package. Package didn't go through because of certain elements. I mean, what does that tell us on weighing short-term gain, long-term vision about economy versus ecology? How do you assess what happened yesterday?
I mean, I know what happened. So, pushing certain legislation to the further future, despite we said 2030, already 2030 is long future to do something. We should make it shorter. And it's simply that certain people or organizations don't see the benefit to make Europe, more inclusive, beautiful, better. It seems this is the challenge. So we need to educate people, institutions, municipalities, to really realize that, putting proper legislation, regulation, frameworks, to make things change faster is a benefit for all. But it seems that we still don't see the benefits.
You've mentioned, and then I'll come back to the both of you, but you've mentioned a couple of times examples that were created or suggested by citizens to their local authorities and municipalities, and then up. Is that the way to go? Does it have to be bottom up? Or how do you see the relation to regulation or ideas like from Agras as this one?
I think that, the regular people tend to read a lot. They see the pictures. They want to live in a nice environment. So I think that if
But do they always know what is needed?
Maybe they don't know. So if I look at the cities, at the municipality level, I think the municipalities needs to be a moderator and involve the local communities. So the cities needs to be moderators, and the local citizens needs to be the player, actor, idea creators. And we see many of examples. For example, one school we did 3 years ago. There was a renovation of school, energy efficiency renovation. And they asked the students, what do you want to do? And they said, hey, we want to have not just roof renovated, we want to have a roof classroom. So they did a green roof, they did a vegetable garden on top, they have open place to enjoy, and it came from the pupils. I mean, it's a secondary school from 14 to 18. So these young people were giving so many good ideas, and then it was realized with a bit of support of the European/local funds. So, we need to give idea creation to the people, and we who are on municipal, regional level, we need to be a moderators. I think this is the key to success.
And Ms. Edwards, do people have the time, the energy, is it a priority, do you feel, at a local level for citizens at this time?
Well, I must say that indeed one of the most impressive projects I've seen in the social housing district is indeed coming from this spirit. All of the decision making was actually made together with the over 200 inhabitants before the building was even there. And so they were involved in the choice of materials, obviously within the limitations of the budget. They also are now co-managing the building, and it's resulting in a much smoother, actually, management and maintenance of the estate than other more top-down examples. And even more inspiring, on the management board, we have people with disabilities, because there's a block dedicated and built and designed together with the families of young people with disabilities, and also a specialized group working on autism. So you have an amazing empowerment of actually those people who potentially would be very disempowered if they don't have the right living environments. But again, this was carried out also by led by the city with a social housing provider, and who has a limited profit, so it's not beholden to
shareholders or
the profit. And I would just like to mention the ETS situation. Obviously, very tough discussions in the Parliament. Was on the outset, I think we knew that there was a lot of opposition from many different parties, from the Greens and the Socialists. And I think, again, we have to contextualize this. Again, inflation up 12% in March this year, and 33% of that is linked to energy. So, and that's affecting lower income groups most, particularly if you think living in a badly insulated home, having to drive to work, maybe a large family to feed. It's hitting those groups worse. And I think the ETS, the way it was formulated, it wasn't clear enough that the financing would be directly used to impact the situation of the most, let's say, vulnerable to the current shock. So I think this is one of the issues that was at stake, and the reason it was blocked. It's a contextualization. We have to try again to get the formula right, and to make sure that the funding really goes to where it's needed. Because obviously, for those households that I've mentioned, greening of their home and more accessible public transport is exactly the way we need to go. But it has to be more tangible.
Mm-hmm. Tangible, affordable as well.
Mm-hmm. And affordable.
Commissioner Hahn.
May I on this
of course.
Yesterday's decision first? They couldn't agree, so it's now given back to the respective committee. So there are different issues. The message I passed to them, because I was very much involved in the so to say setup of this ETS scheme, etc., because it has also a new own resource dimension, which is important for me. I think we should try to distinguish, and this is the message I passed to the lawmakers. Let's negotiate about this now, because there's an urgency. But having in mind the current economic situations, we can show some flexibility when a decision taken now should come into force. Because this is apparently, or was the reason why in some camps there was hesitation, because so to say, the thinking was always if we take now the decision, it comes into force already next year. And in the current circumstances, this is not, for many people, affordable, acceptable. But we are far away from, so to say, starting this, because even if there's a political decision, we have to prepare, let's say, the collecting of all this in a technical way. So before 24, it wouldn't come. But in case the economic situation then is still dire, we can have some flexibility to start it in 25 or so. But I think it's important to be aware about the need, because if we really want to achieve our goals concerning decarbonization, to which we all have committed ourselves. It was a decision of the European Parliament, of all heads of states and prime ministers and the national parliaments. So it's not something the Commission imposed. So if we stick to our goals, which are not, I understand, challenged by anybody in principle, we have to adapt or we have to show some flexibility. But in principle, there is an urgency, and I only hope that the lawmakers understand this, but understand also that they have some room for maneuver.
Okay, let's keep that political discussion for here, for now, to this. Well, thank you for all of that. I want to get back to the practicalities of shaping a city. And Commissioner Hahn, I was going to ask you, you've been active for several years in local policies in Vienna before you became commissioner. I was wondering, you already mentioned building social housing in Vienna and making art a part of it from the very, very beginning. Are there other things that you take away from that time, good practices, things you've learned in, for example, about ways to involve the citizens, or other things that you think like this is what we have to bear in mind when we go forward with these Bauhaus ideals?
I think there are two issues also referring to what you have said, because you said, referring to my first or second statement, we want to be part of the city here. And you said, okay, let's discuss. You don't want to be a Fremdkörper. I want to correct this because what we see today in Brussels, we can see almost in each city, in every city. It was a concept of the 50s and 60s to separate living from working. And for instance, in Vienna, I think we have at least 2 bridges crossing the Danube only to react to this separation between living and working, because there is such a huge traffic only for this to help people commuting from home to work. And I think all the urban planners have learned and understood we need a mixture of working and living, and I think the new living and working opportunities and conditions enable this, and it's conducive for having a better mixture. And in that respect, I would also see our efforts here to overcome this historic separation and to be part of, so to say, the living situation of people.
So have you reached out to Brussels authorities already?
Exactly. We are in a very good contact and relationship, and indeed we are offering, if we are reducing office space, that this should turn into apartments, for instance, in housing opportunities, really to get this kind of mixture. Even if new offices are built, we have one example. I know not everybody is happy. Maybe I have a similar view, this famous Tower 1, but part of it are apartments. So we try, and shops, etc. So I think this is important to have this mixture, and this is something we would like to contribute here in Brussels, to have a more inclusive way of living. Because my vision 30, 40 years ago, which I expressed several times in papers, etc., was the ideal concept would be that people could reach their working place on foot. or
There's the
nowadays
10-minute
bicycle.
city concept as well in that regard.
That would be great, because it also gives the opportunity, for instance, to spend lunchtime together with your family, if this is possible, and not to leave in the morning and return in the afternoon, in the evening. So there would be many positive effects also for the social fabric of a city, because we know where you experience a district or a borough by walking on a daily basis, you have much more ownership. When I remember my son, who is meantime 34 and made me grandfather, when I brought him to the kindergarten, unfortunately we had to go by car, but he was familiar with a distance from his home, which he experienced on a daily basis on foot. And then again, he was familiar when we were close to the kindergarten. And once he asked me, I mean, it was a 5 or 10 minutes drive between the two areas with whom he was familiar. Is it the same like from us to America? So this little boy at that time didn't have a feeling because he never experienced the situation on foot. And the same is for elderly people or for everybody. So we should give people much more opportunities, not only walking the dog, but walking the city. And walking the city would create much more ownership for the development of a city, in particular for immediate neighborhood. So greening is not something which is so to say, only related to a building, but it's a concept for a city as such.
Of course, in European cities, there's a long history to most of the cities. Can it always be done? Because as the Commissioner says, in the 60s, especially in Brussels too, the idea was big lanes, big buildings. So how can you redo the city?
Maybe on this topic, so in general, honestly, in the dense cities, it's better to do small little patches of green than a big park. That's easy, and it's also relatively easy to do. If you have
better because it's more practical,
it's
practically
more practical,
feasible,
so
or also more healthy?
It's healthy, it's practical. First of all, you come out of your building, you see these green patches, you can maybe have one bench there, you can sit there. It's practical for the people to hang out, to enjoy it, to have a bit of shadow during the summer. At the same time, pollinator initiatives, the pollinators, bees and butterflies, they are dying. So we need to do the network of green patches in the cities. And it's really simple to do. There is a superb example in, I think it's in Porto. But the park is called Park of Lisbon, but it's in Porto. It used to be a parking place, a garage, and it was gray, paved. The municipality did great thing. They green it. They have 50 olive trees there. They have a park where people can enjoy, have a, afternoon sandwich or not a barbecue, but a drink in a local bar which is there. So it's easy to be done. You just need to give opportunity. And this was again done by ideas of the people. You do these small parks, small patches. You have a big lane. In the past they put maybe the trees in the middle of the big avenue. Why don't we put it on the side next to the buildings? You are doing the shadow, you're cooling the buildings, and it's again simple to do. And it's you're also building. Bringing business to the local people, because the local gardener can do it. So I think we just need to, again, as I said, biodiversity strategy. We need to teach the municipalities how to do it, and they need to be moderator of the ideas from the people. I think this is the idea forward.
May I add,
Sure.
In the late 70s, we started in Vienna exactly in this old housing structures to start greening, to encourage people greening the inner courtyards. Before that, there was a huge tristesse of this. But now we started this exercise, and it's going on till today, that inner courtyards are green, so to say, are nowadays places where you like to spend some time in case you don't have a balcony or terrace, which is very often the case. So I think this is something which can be done rather easily and contributes a lot to the quality of life in a city district.
In small pockets. Ms. Edwards, I saw you were writing furiously. Any ideas to add?
No, I really like this child proportioned city. I think that's really something to add to the 15-minute city, so to see it through that perspective. And of course, these simple solutions to the greening, because very often we get overly technical. But yes, I think this spirit of overcoming divisions between, which is really, I think, in the spirit of the Bauhaus, and mentioned by Commissioner Hahn, these divisions between work and home place, or divisions in the city. And I think what we have to bring it further and make sure we have indeed districts where people with different incomes, different lifestyles can thrive in their communities. And I think this is a real opportunity we have with the agreement to the decarbonisation agenda that you meant, Commissioner Hahn mentioned. There is obviously the decarbonisation agenda is that we have no choice about that, and I think it can be really also, if we do it right, it can be really also this trigger to include the most vulnerable, to reach out to those furthest from the labour market, to ensure that they also have access to opportunity and services by designing the energy transition well. I think it's a huge opportunity. We've got those targets. We don't have to be over-prescriptive from EU level, but we have to make sure that the tools are there to, let's say, tap into all that creativity that there is at local level. And I think the Bauhaus is a step in that right direction.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel about the city being a sort of an island in the wider area or region, and it not always for everybody being very accessible? The idea was also to talk about boundaries. How do you connote cities and boundaries, or urban areas and boundaries? Is there a conflict there, or do you feel? You mentioned, Mr. Sumi, that most people will be a majority of people will be living in cities in the very near future. So, are cities going to spread out even more, or will they close in on themselves and shut out people? How do you see that evolve?
I think, again, it has to be something where we have a clear public intervention, a public role to play to go against that trend. So we see
to go against more spreading, or
to go against excluding of certain groups because of lack of accessibility and the spread. And I think there's excellent examples now that we see of recuperation of unused former barracks, army barracks, former factories. I think of one
often at a great cost for cleaning up pollution, etc. Historical
that,
pollution.
if it's done well, can pay back. And I think this was the point raised by Jure. This is a cost up front, but we really have to look at it from a budgetary perspective. The payback will come in terms of competitiveness, because the house prices are becoming, I mean, even if we look at somewhere where Silicon Valley, companies are pulling out because of the high house prices. So if you maintain that affordability and make sure you maintain affordable also for, let's say, students, because now we see places where students are turning down places in university because of lack of affordability. We have no space for, as an arrival city for migrants, for instance, to come and to flourish and to also flourish themselves, but also to contribute to the economy. So it's looking at the long-term payback for society of having an inclusive society. And yet this example that in Lyon that comes to mind, L'Autre Soie, that's converting a former silk factory with one quarter, let's say, social housing provision and other private housing, but also cultural institution, and housing first, also units which would directly address the homelessness issue in Lyon. So excellent ways where you don't contribute to sprawl, but you open up the city and allow everyone to...
But more dense cities then, densely built, not expanding, but living smaller and living closer together?
Yeah, I mean, there is an opportunity which is in particular something for European cities. We are now appreciate very much that big railway stations, central railway stations, are actually downtown. But if you look at the tracks, they are uncovered. And you would gain a lot of inner district area if you cover these tracks. And of course, you have to measure the costs of the coverage by saving costs if you extend cities and building additional infrastructure. In the inner city districts, you have schools, you have creches, kindergartens, you have shopping opportunities, etc. So if you create additional city space by covering, and by the way, maybe there are some railway aficionados, but in general, I would say these railway tracks inside the city are, first of all, separating districts, and personally, I don't consider them very attractive. So I think there is a lot of potential to cover places which are quasi wasted for a more dense city in a good way.
More opportunities. It all sounds great and self-evident, but a lot of the stakeholders in this whole project that is holistic, if I may use that word, the whole Bauhaus idea is quite holistic. A lot of the stakeholders, be it business, be it industry, be it citizens, be it local authorities, what have you, work separately. What needs to be done to get them together to work on that vision? Because that is not happening, is it? Or not enough? Or we would be way ahead in this whole trajectory?
I think it always depends on people, thanks God, yeah, and not on machines. But we need, of course, and this is why we have now launched this Bauhaus idea. But again, in my understanding, we should understand it not only as a, let's say, building concept in the more narrow sense, but as initiating urban planning, living, etc. And here, of course, we need a holistic approach, people sitting together. But again, it depends on people. Of course, today, we very often see, unfortunately, a very quick change of political leadership. So there is very often no real stability. But that's why I think it's important at least to use wherever possible momentums to agree about strategies which survive political changes. Yeah? I mean, this could be a potential way forward. But again, at the end of the day, we have to admit we depend on people. But I think if there is, like here, a uniform, so to say, idea to promote in a certain way urban development, again, we can lead by example, it will inspire others. And of course, we have our structural funds, which are there to finance what we call seed initiatives in order to lead by example, to create something which then can be in a good way reduplicated, etc. So there are possibilities, there is a framework, but at the end of the day, it's about people.
Yeah. That's my first question to you. Are you the funder as a commissioner of budget of the whole NEB festival? I'm now picking that question up again because does the NEB have the Bauhaus idea have a proper budget of its own, or should people wanting to work in that vein go shop around different funds in the European framework to find financing if they're eligible, of course? How does it work?
Well, in principle, I think it's about mostly the structural funds. In my first mandate, I started as a commissioner for regional policy. With my background as a city councillor, I managed to change the title and, more important, the, let's say, philosophy of this general directorate. And today it's called regional and urban policy. So we introduced the urban aspect, which I consider important because my example is all of us might know 200 or even more cities where they are located in Europe. But can you tell me 10 or 20 regions outside the country you know best where they are? No, it's about the city which identifies a region. And that's why I think also from a European perspective, it's so important to see the relevance of urban policy. And that's why we have, so to say, extended our activities from the region to the urban structure. And of course, supported also by the necessary financial means. But here it's more to the member states, the regions, how they want to use it. But in principle, money would be available. And of course, there are other sources like research, etc. But this is more for very targeted activities. But in principle, to transform our cities, to pursue our climate goals, exactly for that purpose, the structural funds are there.
Okay. We are nearing the end of this panel discussion. I would like to ask each one of you if you would like to address someone, some institution or some commissioner, for example, in particular with a demand or a question regarding the topic we've been discussing, something you feel needs to be done or needs to be tackled most urgently, or something you want to share in terms of good practice that you think like, look at that as an example and take it forward.
Yeah, first of all, I'm really happy that I see we are more or less aligned what we want to do. Maybe 1 or 2 points what we need to do. I already mentioned we are working with Joint Research Center of the European Commission to really know exactly what are the benefits of green infrastructure, whether it is in the buildings or elsewhere. But now there are the laws or regulations which are coming in. Nature restoration law. Make sure that it will be done properly with ideas how to do the urban places nicer. There is EPBD which is coming in. Implement green infrastructure inside, because a GRC report, research will show all the benefits for the energy efficiency. And then another one which is coming is Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, which is 30 years old. Green infrastructure can handle the stormwater. 30 years ago, there were no so severe storms. So make sure that the green infrastructure is playing a really incremental role on managing rainwater. So 3 things, 3 legislations where we need to make it really, I would say, bulletproof for the greening of the cities.
Thank you very much. Very pointedly, Ms. Edwards. Briefly?
Very briefly, yes. I would say, I think especially as due to your experience in Vienna, which is one of the, say, lighthouses when it comes also to the energy transition, inclusive energy transition, to really promote this across the EU, and not just the finished product, but how they got there. And it's exactly this point that you mentioned. So they have institutions there that are over 100 years old, that have been delivering affordable, thriving communities for over 100 years. But what we see is that there's this institutional, this governance gap is very present in other parts of the Union. And this is where I think we really need to focus, because without the right governance, it will be difficult. And I think EU funds, I mean, I mentioned Shape EU, we are really working on that, but I think EU funds can do more to build that governance which will withstand the political cycle, go beyond the political cycle.
Okay. I want to thank you very much. From you, Commissioner, I remember your words about ideas, and in the end it comes down to people taking the lead and investing their energies and ideas into the cities and urban areas of the future, among many other things, of course. I want to thank you very much for being here with us today, Juri Sumi, Sorcha Edwards, and of course, Commissioner Johannes Hahn. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.